I'm really excited to introduce our next topic. Me Too comes to Wall Street. So we're going to be in conversation with Lauren Bonner and Catherine Zaleski today. And so today on the line, we've got Lauren Bonner, who has over 15 years of experience leading turnaround, scaling companies and building technologies, and 7 years of experience investing in early stage companies and small businesses. She was an executive officer at Point72, a $19 billion hedge fund where she built a proprietary analytics platform to boost returns. Previously, she was an operating partner at 1O Capital, a fintech venture fund that launched Better Mortgage, that's now valued at $4 billion, where she worked closely from its infancy. She has also managed teams at Bridgewater Associates. She is an angel investor, primarily investing in female founders. So welcome and thank you. And moderating today's conversation, we have our very own Catherine Zaleski, who is the co-founder and president of Power to Fly. She was named as one of Fast Company's 100 most creative people in business. She frequently writes and contributes to the New York Times, Quartz, Business Insider, Fortune, and Forbes on how companies can solve their diversity hiring challenges. Before she decided to co-found Power to Fly to tackle gender disparity, she was in media, where she started her career as the 6th employee of the Huffington Post. She left in November 2009 to take a role at the Washington Post as executive producer and head of digital news products. Additionally, before co-founding Power to Fly, she was a founding managing editor of Now This. And so if you didn't know that, now you do. And I am very excited to pass the mic over to both of you, welcome you, and thank you so much for being here.
Awesome. Thank you, Nicole. That's like the most thorough introduction I think I've received in a long time. So I appreciate it. It reminded me of many of my activities in my past life. So very excited to actually be moderating a conversation today, because normally I don't get to do that. And I also just popped into the chat box. I see like 70 of you in there right now. So please start putting in some questions as we go through the conversation. So I'm particularly excited today because obviously Lauren has a very esteemed bio and career, but I also went to kindergarten with her. We went to school together actually through the 5th grade. And when I heard that she was a powerhouse in the financial industry, I wasn't particularly surprised, but it also was a bit of an incongruous journey from our activities in kindergarten. So tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got to where you are today.
Well, great to be here. Thanks for having me. Well, shortly after graduating from kindergarten, I started my career in and disconnected myself from my mother's leg. I started my career in nonprofit, of all places, right out of college. And after a couple of years there, my CEO said to me, you're really a 100 miles per hour person in a 50 mile per hour zone. Maybe another industry would be better for you. And so I then started, based on the advice from mentors, started interviewing on Wall Street. And I showed up at Bridgewater, the world's largest hedge fund. And I told them that I'm a 100 miles per hour person. And they said, great, that sounds good to us. And thus kicked off my career in finance. So I was there for some time, managing teams in the investment engine as well as in the talent engine, and then went into fintech and the startup world and venture investing, where I was a partner, and then moved on to Point72 to build a proprietary tech platform for them. As you know, about a year into my experience there, filed a gender discrimination lawsuit, and I continued to work at the firm for about 2.5 years, 3 years after that, as the lawsuit continued to play out. And it just wrapped up about 8 months ago now.
Yeah.
So here we are.
I'm always amazed that you continued to stay at the company while you were filing the suit, which takes just incredible courage, and also focus on the results that you wanted to see, not for yourself, but for other people. I mean, you could have. So I'd love to hear a little bit more around, what you talked about, what motivated the suit a little bit. It was around about pay discrepancy and the fact that you were actually you were in the people analytics area of the business as well. Can you talk more broadly about discrepancy and how and other battles that you've seen that are actually working out on that front or not?
Sure. I think, well, I can't get too specific about the case itself. I can say
Yeah.
that, you and I grew up in we went to great schools, we had great opportunities. I felt a great sense of kind of privilege, and having gone to a couple of firms, having had a number of networks and real relationships and a track record, I really felt like I had an opportunity and a sense of responsibility to do something meaningful. And that is the thing that really kind of motivated me, and also really carried me through during those pretty awkward and painful moments, to just kind of stay the path, because I knew that there are a lot of women who would have an even harder time going through the same experience.
Yeah. Yeah, it's incredible. And what do you think, aside from actually bringing these cases up in the legal system, do you have thoughts on how women can advocate for themselves within financial institutions? I mean, you actually made a point that you were told you were too aggressive to be promoted. I have a quote here about that. So how do you, what's your advice on coming around that corner?
That's a really hard one. I mean, I think, you know, um, it's a tough balance, right? And I think the kind of worst and best advice I can give is really try to find a place that values who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And I had been able to do that in a number of the places, the financial firms where I worked, where they really valued that I was sort of aggressive and hard charging and sort of getting after it. That was really important to them. And so I think part of it is really thinking critically about what kind of place that you're joining.
Mm-hmm.
And then also trying to find a really almost impossible balance of trying to be aggressive and outperform, and at the same time be diplomatic and likable. I mean, it's I don't have a great answer for you, unfortunately, because you do have to sort of build leadership skills, build consensus, and be diplomatic, and at the same time achieve results. So I
Yeah.
think it's a tough balancing act to ask women to achieve. And I think the best thing we can do is try to find places and bosses who value that.
Yeah. I was just recommended a book called Leadership Without Authority, even though I'm the boss, but it's actually a pretty good book by Keith Ferrazzi, and he's done a lot of studies around how people can have a lot of influence within an organization if they're not the boss. But even as the boss, you have to get people to obviously lead alongside with you. We don't have top-down structures that we know that those are not particularly effective. So it was a helpful book on that front. But I do find that the word aggressive is just still so toxic, and I actually use it often in sales pitches, because I'll find that people will say, well, what do you actually do? How do you get people in the room? How do you do that? And sometimes you just have to say, we have to be aggressive, and there's like a hush. So it sort of depends on the moment, but I do find it effective in some cases. So.
Yeah, I think, look, if you're aggressive, come see me. I'd love to invest in you. I think it's great.
Yeah.
I think it means you achieve, but it is one of those words that I think, like, when you look back 15, 20 years, it was sort of like when women used to be called ambitious, and that was sort of had all kinds of sort of loaded connectivity to it, where really it's just, they want women who want to do big things in their career. And so hopefully aggressive will start to get smoothed out.
I'm on a mission to smooth out aggressive. I also feel like we went to an all-girls school where we had, I at least felt like I should be really aggressive in sports, and I really like that. But and so you sort of had that training when you were younger, and then obviously, I definitely got feedback throughout my career of be softer, be calmer, and it was very hard to take. But anyway, I hope I'm striking the balance at least while pushing being aggressive where you need to be aggressive. So speaking of aggressive in investing, you obviously, in order to get deals done and to find the right talent, the right people to invest in, being aggressive works. What kind of and tell us about the groups that you're looking at right now, or the deals you're looking at.
I'm looking at two categories of investing really right now. One is venture fallen angels.
Venture fallen angels? What's that? Oh
yeah,
God, that sounds. I've never heard that.
We'll see if it takes off. Essentially, startups that have been through a couple of rounds of venture funding, probably got a little bit too overvalued, are out of cash, aren't showing the kind of unicorn numbers that they need to show, but are still generating revenue. But because they're not sort of going to be unicorns, venture funds are backing away from these companies because they're no longer in the venture mandate. And so these founders and management teams are sort of looking around saying, we have a good company here. We're not going to be a unicorn, but we still can achieve sustainable, solid results and good returns at a lower valuation that's much more reasonable. And so those are the companies I'm investing in those companies at the moment, as well as always, or I guess for the last 7 or 10 years, female founded companies, my early stage companies. I just, as we said earlier, if you're an aggressive woman, come see me. I'd love to invest in you.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting because it is such a frothy market right now. So is 1-0, but 1-0 Capital has is that the mandate of 1-0 Capital to invest in female founders, or is that your mandate?
No, I should clarify. So I continue to be a partner at the fund, although I'm not really there in a day-to-day capacity. I'm really, this is on my sort of personal, my new initiative that I've been working on over the last 6 or 9 months.
Okay, well, I want to hear, I'm very interested in that new initiative because I've personally been on, I find that there's this mandate when you're starting a company to build a rocket ship, right? Yep. And do it as fast as possible. But the flip side of a rocket ship is rocket ships blow up and they hurt people and they kill people sometimes.
Yes,
and you look at I think there was this great Steve Jobs quote actually, where he said, I'm often surprised by how long overnight successes actually take to build. And so there's, there are these stories out there that we're constantly hit by about fast growing companies. They grow very fast and most of them blow up, as rocket ships do. And then some of them IPO or they go on to other stuff, but there's very little talk about the reality of building a company, which is usually a lot of trial and error, a lot of near misses, and some slow growth until you can really figure out how it catches. So
yeah, that's exactly right. And the number of startups that actually get venture funding is a relatively small number. And then of those venture-backed companies, 90% of them ultimately fail, which is staggering because I don't actually believe that 90% of them are bad companies. But I think, running them as not every company was born to be a unicorn. Some of them are just born to be regular old nice horses and ponies, So I think there's a real space for us to kind of focus on these companies, bring them down into sort of more reasonable cost structures, and preserve the good product and the good team that's there, without letting them kind of explode. Your metaphor.
Yeah, well, it also, and it's convenient, like explosion is one sort of,
explosion or wilt, shall we say.
Yes, or wilt. But the truth is that because of the pressure for hyper growth, you often destroy the company in the process, and you destroy a lot of people's lives because the management is so focused on running the thing, running so fast up that you never focus on employees and what actually is required for sustainable growth. And I've seen this pressure happen, especially on female founders in the last 5 years, where when we started Power to Fly, it was like, if you were a female founded business, you were sort of put on this, the press was so intense. It was like all the stories out there were so great, but really what happened was your story was being told by someone else. It was out of your control before you had even gotten to know your team or had those honest conversations with them. You were already being written about as a certain person in the press, and with expectations that it would be hyper growth, versus what really founders should do is probably avoid press in the beginning, I think now, in retrospect, from someone who got a lot of press, and really focus on building the team and that kind of trust in the early days. So
yeah, I think that's probably right. That makes a lot of sense.
So, and I think we've seen a lot of that, we've seen a lot of companies blow up because of the founder was on a pedestal that was not realistic or even of their own making at that point. So yeah. All right. So we have a couple, let's see. I'm looking for some questions. We got some encouragement here. Jill Severin said, amen, Lauren. So we're good. We got some stuff going on from the team. Make sure everybody that you keep putting your questions in there as well. Let's talk a little bit about, what's going on with inclusion on Wall Street in general. And there was so much focus back in 2017, 2018. And now obviously the focus has gotten even larger on building even more intersectional teams and broader diversity initiatives. But I'm curious what you think about the Me Too, what's going on with Me Too on Wall Street and what's happening there and what's the future there.
Well, I think what's interesting about Wall Street is so most of us have been or are bound by NDAs and binding arbitration agreements, and so the kind of publicity that you might see in other industries around stories coming out, there's just not as much to see on Wall Street because of these agreements. And so anecdotally, from what I've been hearing and from what lawyers in the field are hearing, is that there is actually a lot of women who are speaking up, pushing back, kind of pushing for what they really deserve, and kind of getting some closure from a difficult situation, but you just don't hear about it as much. Right. So I do think that there's activity, it's just sort of silent. So I think that's happening. In terms of the future, I think you're going to see a bifurcation. I think you're going to see sort of the larger financial institutions pushing more and more, in large part because of public pressure, into more inclusive hiring, promoting, paying, allocating. And I think that's great. I think you're also going to see some of these smaller, more private institutions digging their heels in. And so I think it's going to kind of, much like some of our politics, I think you're kind of going to have folks on both sides. Ultimately, I think it sort of curves towards more inclusion over time. But in the short term, I think you're going to see some real bifurcation. And so that's where I think it really becomes important to understand where you want to work.
Yeah. Definitely. The NDA point is really interesting because you've seen a huge pushback in tech on NDAs, and but not so much in finance. So we'll see.
I don't think that's a tough one. I think that's a tough one to crack. I don't personally see that changing in the future. I think what's going to really move the needle in this business is more diverse money managers and allocators. That's going to change everything. Right. And that's really where we need to move.
Yeah. And we're seeing some big institutions try to make hires, at least like on the financial advisor area, but money managers are, it's a different group there as well. So I think the question is like, yes, what are the training programs? How do people nurture those relationships from the mid-level to the senior level as well? So
and a lot of it comes down to, I think, incentives. right? Who are the allocators? Who are the decision makers? When you think about pensions, what are their stakeholders asking them to, what kinds of decisions are they asking them to make on their behalf? And so that helps move things.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about pay equity a little bit too as we wrap up, because you've had access to a lot of data when you're looking across the people functions at these firms. What do you think? I mean, we know that it's disproportionate. We also had an administration previously that eliminated the need for reporting on this. So what is the work actually involved in creating pay equity? What needs to happen?
I think there has to be, first of all, I think CEOs and leaders of these institutions need to do two things. They need to, one, hire an HR leader or talent leader with a backbone, someone who is going to acknowledge that people risk is enterprise risk, and from a risk management perspective, there needs to be sort of a proactive effort. And then secondly, I think they need to just look at the data and just start from the data and say, you know what, wherever we are, and we need to make progress. I've found, in my experiences and in my conversations with a lot of women in this situation, you don't need things. There's not necessarily an expectation that things are great today, but there has to be a path to progress and things going forward, and,
Right.
and an organizational commitment. And so it really comes down to who's the leadership, and will they look at the data and kind of own the data and choose to say, okay, we're going to do something about it.
And do you think they should draw a line and say, from this point on, we will raise these salaries that have been traditionally, these groups that have been traditionally paid less, or some retroactive, almost like, reparation payments?
I think I'm not a big fan of incrementalism. So I think, sort of easing into those decisions or sort of scaling people up slowly doesn't really make any logical sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you just switch over, just make the changes. Those are hard conversations, but organizations have done it and done it effectively. You look at places like Salesforce and others who have really effectively managed those changes and retained talent. And so I'm not really a big fan of sort of, once you identify a problem and you have an opportunity to change, just change it. In terms of reparations, I think it really depends on a little bit more about the organization. So I'm not sure I can speak too well to that one. But.
Yeah, no, it's a great. Every organization is obviously very different, so I appreciate any sort of general answer too that you have. So we got a question here from Ashley. How do you distinguish between real allies and people that are just saying diversity is a good idea? I mean, I'm sure you've had a lot of people when you put forth your lawsuit that were there to sort of promote the cause, but not actually do the work. So how do you distinguish between them?
That's a good question. Actually, a male boss that I had once gave me this advice, and it's sort of heteronormative, and but in finance, it's still a good rule to apply. He said, look for what the male leadership's wives do.
Interesting.
And
pull that out a little.
And see if they have like robust careers, see what they're doing with themselves. And it'll give you some real insight into the sort of leadership's real own values, which I actually thought was pretty good advice. It's not necessarily a scalable idea. I think you just got to ask a lot of follow-up questions and sort of dig a little bit, talk to folks who are at the organization where you're interviewing, and really sort of do some digging and diligence. But I thought that was a helpful line.
I actually think that's great advice. And in the VC space, I mean, when I was pitching Power to Fly out in the Bay Area, the amount of meetings that I went into with all male VCs where they would say, oh, I'm going to take this back to my wife. see
Yeah.
what she thinks. I should have said, well, what does she do? Like, how is she the authority on this versus so, and also isn't this, a larger problem for you as well? So yeah, it's oh, okay. So we got Lauren Haggerty asking, how has imposter syndrome impacted your career journey, if at all? It's an interesting one. There was actually an article in the journal today about imposter syndrome. So
Oh, is that right? I haven't read that yet. Let's
yes.
look it up. It certainly has. I mean, it certainly has. And I think, as I talk to women um, kind of ahead of me in their careers, I'm always surprised to learn that they have the same experience. That it's a hard thing to let go. I think, particularly when you're sort of the only woman in a room. It's hard not to let that sink in. But sort of like anything else, you just sort of at least I've sort of acknowledged that that's a thing that's happening and just keep on moving.
Yeah. Sorry, I keep looking askance. There's this fly that's torturing me. So I'm trying to dodge it a little bit. Spring is here. Well, this article in the Wall Street Journal is pretty interesting because it's about how damaging imposter syndrome is really at the end of the day. It really affects our decisions. And I was very young when I came over to be the director of digital at the Washington Post. And I remember having this dream often that someone was standing over my bed. It sounds really spooky, but I wake up with a start. And I took it to a friend of mine who was like a big deal at the corporate executive board. And, it was just super smart. And she said, oh, that's imposter syndrome. Someone's judging you every night when you go to bed. And I was like, and they're in my room. It's terrible. Like, every night I would wake, not every night, but very frequently it was the same dream over and over again. So I knew that I had to just check it and I had to get that thing out of my room.
Yeah, it's hard to make it. I found that it's hard to really actually make it go away as much as just sort of acknowledge it's there and try to keep going.
Yeah. Right.
Hopefully someday it'll go away.
Yeah.
How did you get over it?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. We need to, it needs to go away for sure. So we have 2 minutes left. Just any advice that you wish you had in the beginning of your journey, even a couple of years ago that you would like to impart? We like to say sort of advice to your previous self.
Oh gosh. I think sort of be strategic. That sounds a little bit like a bit of a platform, but really try to step back and imagine yourself where you are on your field, and where you want to go. And be planful and thoughtful about sort of what the steps are to take that. I think at times in my career, I certainly have just gotten lucky and just fallen into something. Whereas there have been other moments in my life where I've really stepped back and seen that field and thought about that path. And it's hard work. It's hard mental work to kind of work yourself through, what do I really want? Where do I really want to go? Even if it's in the short term, but I think that's had the most meaningful impact on my career.
Yeah. I found that the what do I really want was harder than the how to get there a little bit. But
yeah. Well, if you can say this is what I want in 2 years, it makes it a little bit easier.
Right. I mean, the funny thing is I actually knew exactly what I wanted to be when I was 20 years old. And then when I was 30, I was like, oh my God, I need to figure something else out. So that, it changes as you evolve in life for sure. So awesome. Well, thank you for joining us from
Good
today.
To see you.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Tell your mom I say hi. All right. Bye.
Likewise.
All right. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Perfect. Well, thank you both for such an incredible conversation and sharing so many bits of advice. I know that there were a lot of people in the audience that really appreciated it. So thank you.